You're not allowed at the Christmas table, Linda. You don't belong with us up here.
You're not allowed at the Christmas table. Linda, you don't belong with us up here. For a moment I thought I'd misheard her. Then my daughter-in-law calmly picked up my plate, my glass, even the little card that said Mom, and carried them away like she was clearing trash. Go sit over there. The real family needs space, Vanessa added, pointing to a folding chair in the corner. You'll just make everything weird. Laughter died. Nobody met my eyes. My son stared at his napkin as if he could fold me out of his life with it. In my own house, on my own Christmas Eve, I was the one being removed from the picture. Vanessa slid my chair all the way to the wall and straightened her red dress like she'd just fixed a crooked painting. It's not personal, she said lightly, loud enough for everyone to hear. I just want the main table to look balanced, young, festive. Her friends tittered weakly. The silver candlesticks flickered, throwing soft light on their carefully curled hair and glittering earrings. The roasted turkey steamed in the middle of the table, surrounded by dishes I had cooked with these tired hands all afternoon. My spot was now an empty gap between Brian and Chloe, a little hole where I used to fit. Chloe's small hand shot up, fingers clutching her fork. But I want Grandma next to me, she blurted out. Her voice cracked. It's Christmas. Vanessa's smile hardened. Sweetie, Grandma will sit over there so the adults can talk, she said, as if explaining seating charts to a stubborn child. You'll see her later. Brian cleared his throat but never looked at me. Just let it go. Mom, he muttered, eyes fixed on his wine glass. Don't make a scene. Vanessa worked hard on this. Worked hard. I glanced at the table runners I had ironed, the plates I had polished, the food I had paid for. Around us, chairs creaked, someone coughed into a napkin, a cousin reached for the bread basket without saying a word. No one said, "This is wrong." No one said, "Let her sit." I felt my cheeks burn while the rest of me went numb, as if my body had quietly stepped out of the room and left only a trembling outline behind. Vanessa nudged my chair farther from the table with her heel. Honestly. Brian, we don't have room for everyone, she said, rolling her eyes. Your mom will be more comfortable over there. She's old. She doesn't even eat that much. A few people gave that awkward little laugh people use when they know something is cruel but don't want to get involved. Vanessa grabbed a clean plate and dropped it onto the tiny folding table by the wall, next to the trash can and the dog's water bowl. See perfect, she chirped. That way the photos will look nice. No offense. Linda. But this is our first real Christmas as a proper family. I don't want it to look like a retirement home. Chloe's fork clattered against her plate. Mom, stop, she whispered. Grandma made all the food. Vanessa didn't even glance at her. Grandma likes cooking. It keeps her busy. We're the ones paying bills around here. That was a lie, and everyone at that table knew it. Brian finally opened his mouth. For a heartbeat. I thought he'd defend me. Vanessa has a point, he said instead, still not looking at me. You know how she is about aesthetics. Just sit where she put you. Mom, don't start drama tonight. Don't start drama. The woman who had just shoved me out of my own Christmas table was avoiding drama, and the son I'd raised on canned soup and secondhand clothes was worried about how the photos would look. Not one of them stood up. Not one said, "She's his mother." I had never felt so invisible in a room full of people whose lives I had quietly paid for. I straightened my napkin with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. For a second, I imagined flipping the table, smashing every glittering wine glass, screaming until someone finally saw me. Instead, I heard my own voice come out calm and small. It's all right, I said, though nothing was. I'm a little tired anyway. Vanessa gave a satisfied little nod, already turning back toward the centerpiece. Good. We don't want you overexerting yourself. I walked away from the table slowly, forcing my back not to bend, feeling every pair of eyes slide off me like I was an ad they'd already skipped. In the hallway, the family photos watched me pass Brian with missing front teeth. Brian at graduation, Brian holding newborn Chloe, in every frame. My hand was somewhere on his shoulder. Upstairs in my room, I opened the top drawer of my dresser. Beneath folded sweaters lay a neat brown envelope with a law firm's logo on it. My thumb brushed over the name Daniel Parker, attorney at law. "If I don't have a place at their table," I whispered to the empty room, "they won't have a place in my will." I felt my throat close, but I refused to let them see me swallow tears like a scolded child. I smoothed the front of my dress, the one I'd bought on clearance so I wouldn't embarrass them, and forced my voice to stay steady. "It's fine," I said. "You all enjoy your Christmas." Vanessa gave me that fake sweet smile people use with waitresses and babysitters. "Thank you." "Linda, we really appreciate you understanding." Understanding what? Exactly. That I had become clutter in my own home. I walked away from the table slowly, back straight, each step like stepping on broken ornaments. No one stopped me. No one called my name. In the hallway, the fairy lights from the tree threw shifting shadows over the family photos. Brian as a boy, Brian as a groom, Brian as a father. My hand was always somewhere on his shoulder. Upstairs, in the quiet. I opened my nightstand drawer and touched the thick envelope waiting there. Daniel Parker, attorney at law. If they could erase me from a chair, I wondered how they would react when I quietly erased their names from something far more important. I wasn't always the old woman they pushed to the corner. There was a time when this house echoed with Brian's laughter and muddy sneakers, when every scratch on these floors felt like proof that life was happening inside these walls. I bought this place with my husband when Brian was 8. We signed the papers with shaky hands and a cheap ballpoint pen, promising each other our son would never have to wonder where he belonged. When my husband died years later, it was just me and the mortgage and a boy who tried to be brave. I worked double shifts at the hospital, packed leftovers into plastic containers, and told Brian, "As long as this roof is over our heads, you will never be homeless." I was proud of that. Still am. When he brought Vanessa home for the first time, she walked through my living room like a real estate agent, running her fingers over the banister. "Cute," she said. "It'll do for now." I laughed it off. Young people talk big. They had student loans, car payments, a baby on the way. When they fell behind on rent, I paid. When their car broke down, I wrote another check. "Mom, we'll pay you back," Brian would say, kissing my cheek. They never did. I told myself it didn't matter. That's what family is for, right? The first time Vanessa suggested selling the house to buy something more modern in our name, it stung. The second time, it bruised. By the 5th time, when she called my decor outdated and laughed that I should be grateful to live with them later, a quiet crack opened inside me. I had spent my life building a home for my son. Somewhere along the way, he started treating it like a prize he was waiting to collect. The envelope in my nightstand wasn't the beginning. It was just the latest piece in a puzzle I had been too afraid to finish. 3 weeks before Christmas, my phone had buzzed while I was folding Chloe's little sweaters. A strange number. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Mrs. Carter." "This is Daniel Parker's office," a calm female voice said when I answered. "He asked me to confirm your appointment for next Tuesday. Updating your estate documents." Estate. Such a big word for one small widow with one old house. "Yes," I'd replied, my palm suddenly damp. "Tell him, I'll be there." I had found Daniel's name through a woman at church whose children were already circling her savings like vultures. "You need everything in writing while you're still clear-headed," she'd warned. "Don't wait until they're making decisions for you." Sitting in his office the first time, with its shelves of leather binders and framed certificates, I had felt both out of place and oddly seen. Daniel listened quietly as I explained that Brian was my only child, that I loved him, that I was concerned about his wife. "I don't want to punish anyone," I'd said. "I just don't want to be forced out of my own home or pressured when I'm weaker." "That's not punishment," he'd replied. "That's protection. For you, and for what you've worked for." We had discussed wills, powers of attorney, things I never thought I'd say out loud. I left that day with a draft and a knot in my stomach torn between loyalty to the boy I raised and the woman in the mirror who was tired of being used. Tonight, after the Christmas table, the knot was still there, but underneath it, something else had started to grow. Not anger, not yet. A thin, steady line of resolve and the smallest, unfamiliar flicker of hope that this time, I might finally choose myself. The next morning, the world looked strangely unchanged for a night that had split something inside me. The wreath still hung on the front door. The poinsettias on the steps were still red and bright, but when I touched the railing on my way down the stairs, my hand shook. I arrived at Daniel Parker's office 15 minutes early, clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles ached. The receptionist greeted me warmly, offered water, asked about my Christmas. I didn't trust my voice enough to answer. Mrs. Carter. Daniel stood at the doorway, tall, composed, dressed in a navy suit that looked like it never wrinkled. His expression softened when he saw me. He must have read something in my face, some combination of exhaustion and the brittle edge of someone who is done pretending. "Come in," he said gently. "We'll go through everything today." I sat across from him at the polished wooden desk. A window behind him looked out on a quiet parking lot, the winter sun pale and cold. He opened a file and folded his hands on top of it. "Before we begin," he said, "I want you to tell me honestly why you're here today." I took a breath that felt jagged and too loud. "I was humiliated last night," I said. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to continue. Not by strangers, by my own family. He didn't rush me, didn't look away. My daughter-in-law told me I couldn't sit at my own Christmas table. Brian said nothing, not a word. The shame rose in waves just from repeating it. I felt like furniture that no longer matches the room. I whispered. Daniel's eyes sharpened with something like protective anger. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said quietly. "But I'm also glad you came today, because what you experienced last night is exactly what we need to talk about." He opened the folder. I braced myself. "Mrs. Gomez Carter, Linda, your current will leaves almost everything to your son." I nodded. "He's my only child." "But the issue," Daniel continued steadily, "is not love, it's access. Power. You have a home that is fully paid off, investments you've managed carefully, savings accumulated over decades. Anyone who expects to inherit something substantial can begin to act like it already belongs to them." A hollow feeling expanded in my chest. "Are you saying they're waiting for me to know?" he interrupted gently. "I'm saying they may already be treating you as if your value lies in what you can give them, not who you are." The words landed with a soft thud, heavy and undeniable. He slid a document toward me. "I've outlined a few options. The first is to update your will to reflect your actual intentions." Actual intentions. I wondered what those even were anymore. Daniel continued. "The second is creating a trust, especially if you want to protect your home. A trust prevents anyone from pushing you to sell it while you're alive or from taking control if something happens later. And Brian," I asked quietly, "if I change things, will it seem like I'm trying to punish him?" Daniel leaned back, studying me. "Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt respected in your own home?" Truly respected images flashed Vanessa brushing past me in the hallway, Brian ignoring my suggestions, Chloe being shushed when she tried to defend me. Christmas dinner, my chair dragged away like an eyesore. I swallowed. "It's been a while. Then this isn't punishment," he said firmly. "This is clarity." He tapped the will. "You can still leave something for Brian, if that feels right. But you don't owe anyone your silence, your house, or your life savings. You have the right to protect what you built." I stared at my hands. I worked so hard for that home. My husband and I, he wanted Brian to have a safe place forever. And Brian does have a safe place, Daniel said. But that doesn't mean you must sacrifice your dignity to keep the memory of that intention alive. Your home is not a reward for bad behavior. It's the legacy of your work. A long silence settled in the room. Not uncomfortable, just heavy, like truth finally being allowed to breathe. "What about Chloe?" I asked softly. "She's the only one who looked at me last night like I mattered." Daniel nodded slowly. "If you want to include her, a trust for her future is common. It protects her from her parents' decisions and keeps your love for her intact." Something loosened in my chest, a knot I'd been carrying for years. He turned the document around so it faced me. "This version splits your assets. A portion to Chloe in a trust she can access at 21, a portion to a charity of your choosing, a small but fair portion to Brian. So he isn't completely cut off, but the house stays under your control until the day you choose otherwise." I read the lines, each one like carving a path out of a dense forest. "Linda," Daniel said more gently now, "people show you who they are long before they believe you'll do something about it. You can love your son and still refuse to reward behavior that harms you. Both things can be true." My eyes stung. I blinked hard. "I don't want to hurt him." I whispered, "I just want to stop being invisible." He nodded. Then, "This is the first step." I sat there for a long moment, listening to the clock on the wall tick steadily. 3 slow beats of fear, 1 quick beat of anger, 2 surprising beats of hope. Finally, with a breath that felt like stepping onto solid ground after months of sinking sand, I reached for the pen. "Let's make the changes," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. Daniel gave a small, approving nod. "Good. Today you're choosing yourself. That's not selfishness. That's survival." As I signed the first page, a quiet truth settled over me, not soft or gentle, but steady as the ink drying under my hand. I couldn't control how they treated me at the Christmas table, but I could decide exactly who would have a place in my future. Daniel closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, studying me with the careful patience of someone who has watched people drown under their own guilt for far too long. "Linda, updating the will is one step," he said, "but we also need to make sure you're protected while you're alive, not just afterward. Protected." The word felt strange, like it belonged to someone younger, someone whose bones didn't ache on winter mornings, but something inside me straightened, as if hearing a forgotten version of my own name. "What exactly do you mean?" I asked. He stood, motioning for me to follow him to a large whiteboard on the far wall. Most attorneys would have kept me at the desk. But Daniel moved like a teacher with a complex lesson to break down. "Let's start with assets," he said, writing the word in neat capital letters: your home and your savings, your investments, and your peace of mind. "My peace of mind," I echoed with a faint smile. He glanced over his shoulder. "Trust me, it's worth more than everything else combined." I huffed a small laugh, surprised at the sound. It had been a long time since anything felt even close to funny. Daniel listed things slowly, letting each word land. "Your home is the priority. It's the root of the tension. Vanessa wants control over it. Brian is compliant enough that he'll go along with whatever keeps the peace." There was no malice in Daniel's tone, just clarity. Hard, clean clarity. "So how do I protect it?" He lifted a second marker. 3 options. I watched as he drew clean lines, connecting boxes like the branches of a sturdy tree revocable trust. Life estate, letters of instruction. "Let's go through them one by one." I nodded, gripping my purse strap until the leather creaked. Option 1, revocable living trust. Think of it as placing your home in a safety box that only you can open while you're alive, he explained. "When you pass, it transfers according to the rules you set without anyone contesting it. Vanessa won't be able to force Brian to sell the house out from under you or pressure you when your health declines. I imagined Vanessa's face if she ever found out the house she'd been circling like a hawk was suddenly out of reach. I didn't smile. But something warm stirred under my ribs, relief, maybe, or justice. And the second option, a life estate, he replied. You give someone, let's say Chloe, the future interest in the house, but you retain the right to live there until your last day. No one can evict you, not even Brian. Chloe, Sweet, timid little Chloe, who still slipped crayon drawings under my door. The idea of giving her something safe and solid made my throat tighten. And the third letters, he said, clear written statements about your wishes, attached to your will. They're not legally binding, but they speak for you when you're not in the room. Sometimes, that's enough to keep people honest. I let the words settle. Which option do you think is best? Daniel set the marker down. For you, the trust. It gives you the most control, and it prevents manipulation, financial or emotional. There it was again. That word, manipulation. I thought of Vanessa's voice at the Christmas table, sugary and sharp. This is for family. You don't belong up here. My chest tightened, but not with shame this time, with something sturdier. All right, I said softly. A trust. Daniel nodded like he'd expected the answer all along. He returned to the desk, flipping through several tabs in the binder. Now let's talk finances. You've helped Brian and Vanessa financially many times over the years. I exhaled slowly, more times than I can remember. Do you want that to continue? The question hit harder than I anticipated. I looked down at my hands that had packed school lunches, scrubbed floors, paid doctor bills, baked birthday cakes, signed checks with shaking fingers so Brian wouldn't have to use another credit card. No, I whispered, not anymore. Daniel smiled gently. Good, then we'll add a clause. Brian will receive a small portion of your cash assets, enough to show fairness, but not enough to make you the family bank. The words family bank made something sting behind my eyes. That's exactly what I had been. Hadn't I, a quiet vault everyone kept withdrawing from without ever making a deposit? What about Vanessa, I asked. Daniel shook his head. You don't owe her anything legally, and frankly, after what you described, you don't owe her anything morally either. His bluntness startled a laugh out of me tight. Startled, but real. Now. He continued, turning a page. We need to talk about the quiet part. I leaned in. The quiet part. He folded his hands. This is where we make sure Brian and Vanessa understand the consequences of their behavior without confrontation, without shouting, without drama. Quiet justice, the kind that feels like a mirror, not a weapon. I studied him, my stomach fluttering with both fear and anticipation. How does that work? We start by establishing boundaries, Daniel said. Strong ones. Boundaries. I repeated, tasting the unfamiliar shape of the word. Yes. First, no more unannounced visits. You'll change the locks. My eyebrows shot up. Change the locks. It's your house, Linda. And from what you've told me, they've been treating it like it's theirs. A simple boundary sends a clear message without a single argument. I imagined Vanessa shaking the doorknob, indignant. Brian looking confused, struggling to explain. The thought frightened me, but it also comforted something deep inside. All right, I murmured. Locks. Second, Daniel continued, you will stop paying their bills. A cold wave of fear washed through me. If I do that, will not they be angry? They're already angry, he reminded me gently. But they need to learn that your money is not an automatic safety net. I nodded slowly. No more payments. Third, he said, leaning back, you meet them with kindness, calmness, but firmness. You speak less. You reveal nothing. And when they act entitled, you simply hold your line, and they'll notice. I whispered. Oh, they will, Daniel said. Nothing unsettles entitled people more than losing the control they thought they had. He wasn't wrong. He opened another tab and pulled out a sheet of paper. Here is the plan I suggest. I listened as he laid it out piece by piece. Each step, both terrifying and strangely empowering, create the trust for Chloe and the charities. Reduce Brian's inheritance. Change the house deed placement. Update power of attorney. Document every financial gift from the past. Close joint accounts. Freeze unauthorized access. Communicate only through clear, short statements. Limit in-person conversations. Rebuild my life outside their orbit. By the time he finished, The room felt bigger. Or maybe I did. Daniel capped his pen and set it aside. Linda, you cannot control how they treat you, but you can control how much of yourself and your future you give them access to. I looked out the window. The winter sun had shifted, throwing pale light across Daniel's desk. For a long moment, I didn't speak. The silence wasn't fear this time. It was understanding. I've spent so many years believing that being a good mother meant giving everything. I said softly, but maybe it just made me easy to hurt. Daniel nodded once. Loving people doesn't mean letting them walk over you. I breathed out a shaky laugh. My husband used to tell me I was too soft-hearted. Soft-hearted is not weak, Daniel replied. It simply means you care deeply, and caring deeply requires strength. His words settled into me like warm sand. What happens next, I asked. Daniel closed the binder. Next, you rebuild your boundaries and your peace. When they realize they no longer control your home, your money, or your choices, they will have to confront their own behavior. And if they don't like it, I murmured. He smiled gently. Then that tells you everything you need to know. For the first time in years, my lungs felt full, not heavy, not constricted, full. Thank you, I whispered. He stood and walked me to the door. This isn't revenge. Linda, it's responsibility. You're not choosing against them, you're choosing for yourself, outside. The air was crisp and cold, but my steps felt strangely light. I pulled my coat tighter and walked to my car, a low hum of determination settling beneath my ribs. Quiet justice. It was a new phrase for me, but it fit. Like a coat finally zipped all the way up on a freezing day. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. I didn't even need to explain. All I needed to do was step into the life I had built and decide, at long last, who would be allowed to share it. The night I chose for the confrontation wasn't a holiday. There were no carols playing, no twinkling lights to soften the edges of anyone's behavior. It was just a quiet Sunday evening in January, the sky already dark by 5, the air outside thin and cold. Inside, I set the dining table for 4, then added a 5th plate and slid it to the end, smaller, with a different pattern. Chloe's plate. I knew Vanessa would notice. I wanted her to. I didn't cook a feast this time. No turkey, no ham, no 16 side dishes that left my back aching for days. Just a pot of stew simmering on the stove and a loaf of bread from the bakery down the street. Simple. Enough. My heartbeat thudded in my ears every time I glanced at the folder resting on the buffet cabinet. It looked so harmless, just some papers in a manila shell, deed copies, bank records, the updated trust documents, a letter from Daniel confirming my mental capacity for any judge who might one day be called. I ran my fingers along the edge of the folder, then pulled my hand back. Not yet. Their car pulled up exactly at 6. Brian always had a talent for punctuality when it served him. I watched from the front window as he got out, Vanessa following, bundled in a camel-colored coat, her hair perfectly blown out despite the wind. Chloe hopped out of the back seat, clutching something to her chest. My stomach tightened and then released. Whatever happened tonight, I reminded myself I had already lived through the worst part, the night my own son watched me be exiled from my own table and said nothing. I opened the door before they could knock. "Hi, Mom," Brian said, his smile cautious. Grandma Chloe darted past him and wrapped her arms around my waist. I inhaled the familiar scent of her shampoo berries and something artificial and held her a heartbeat longer than usual. Vanessa stayed on the doorstep a moment, scanning the entryway as if checking for dust. "We didn't know what to expect," she said, stepping inside at last. "You've been hard to reach." "I've been busy," I replied. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." I saw it then, the quick flick of Vanessa's eyes to the locks on the door. Shinier, newer, different. Brian saw it too. His jaw tightened. "You changed the locks," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I answered simply. "New year," New security system. The old ones were sticking. Vanessa's mouth curled. Would have been nice to know. We stopped by last week and nearly froze outside like delivery drivers. You could have called, I said. Her eyes narrowed, but she let it drop. For now, in the dining room. She stopped short. What's with the casual setup, she asked, looking at the table like it had offended her. No centerpieces, no linen napkins, I shrugged. It's just dinner. Chloe slid into the chair nearest the small plate I'd set aside for her and laid her drawing on it protectively. It was a crayon picture of a house with a big tree in front and 3 small figures on the lawn. 4, I realized. Squinting. There, slightly to the side, was a 4th smaller, gray hair scribbled with a silver crayon that barely showed on the paper. Is that me? I asked her. She nodded. Cheeks pink. I wanted to show you later. Set the table. Chloe, Vanessa ordered, ignoring the picture. Properly. Knives on the right. You know how Grandma gets confused with these things. I felt the barb glide past, sharp and petty, but I didn't reach for it. Not tonight. Dinner began with clinking spoons and the creak of chairs. Brian complimented the stew in a half-hearted way, more out of habit than appreciation. Vanessa took a tiny portion, like she wanted it on record that she had eaten but wasn't thrilled about it. So, Brian said after a few minutes, setting his spoon down, we need to talk about some things. Do we? I asked mildly, tearing off a piece of bread. Vanessa jumped in. The bank called us, she said, eyes bright and sharp. They said your automatic transfer for our rent was canceled, and the joint account we used for emergencies closed. She leaned forward. Is there something you want to tell us? Linda. I met her gaze without flinching. No, I said, I've been very clear with myself. I suppose I forgot you were used to being included in my decisions. Brian frowned. Mom, what's going on? We almost bounced our payment this month. If the landlord hadn't given us a grace period, you're both adults, I said evenly. Adults pay their own rent. He stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. You've always helped. And now, I replied, I'm choosing not to. Vanessa let out a humorless laugh. Is this about Christmas? You're still sulking about a seating arrangement. Chloe's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. Her eyes flicked between us, wide and uneasy. It's not about a chair. I said, it's about what that chair meant. Oh, please. Vanessa scoffed. You're being dramatic. You know how I am about aesthetics. The table was full. You would have been more comfortable being seated next to the trash can. I finished quietly. Silence fell, heavy and immediate. Brian shifted in his chair. Look, it came out wrong. Vanessa didn't mean I meant what I said. She cut in. This is our time now, our little family. We don't need picture-perfect holidays ruined by old people crying over nothing. Chloe flinched. I let the words sink in. Not into me, I was done opening myself like a wound for her. I let them sink into the room, the table, the mind of the 12-year-old watching every move. I see, I said softly. Is that how you see me? Brian. His eyes darted to mine, then away. I think you took it too personally. He said, we're just trying to build a life. Mom, start our own traditions. You could be more flexible, like a doormat. Maybe? I inhaled slowly, then reached behind me to the buffet. My fingers rested on the folder for a moment before I picked it up and laid it on the table between us. What's that? Vanessa asked, suspicion immediately coloring her tone. Clutter, I said, the kind you don't get to throw away. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, the deed, photocopies of signatures old and faded, the ink from another lifetime. Do you know what this is? I asked. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Property paperwork. Great. Is this supposed to be a lecture? It's the deed to this house, I said calmly, the day your father and I signed it. We promised each other it would always be a safe place for Brian. We didn't promise it to anyone else. I slid the paper toward Brian. Whose name do you see? He looked down, jaw working. Yours and Dad's. He muttered. Whose name do you not see? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Vanessa snatched the paper. So everyone knows you own the house. We've never argued that. You've acted like it, I replied. When you talked about our next place, when you told your friends this was our stepping stone, when you rolled your eyes at my furniture and called it temporary, Vanessa's face flushed. That's not what I took out the second stack copies of tax records. These are the property taxes for the last 10 years, all paid by me, not by us. I placed another sheet on top, a list Daniel had helped me compile. Dates, amounts, notations in neat handwriting, and these, I continued, are every rent payment I made for you, every car repair, every time I covered your overdraft fees. Brian, he stiffened. You kept records, yes. I said, the bank did, actually. I simply asked for them. Vanessa laughed again, brittle and sharp. So what, Linda? You're going to invoice us now. Send us a bill for being a mother. No. I said, I don't want your money. Then what is this? Brian snapped, color rising on his neck. Why are you throwing all this in our faces? Because, I answered, my voice low but steady. I am done letting you pretend you built this life alone. You didn't. You stood on my shoulders and then told me I was ruining the view. The words hung in the air, stark and unadorned. Chloe slowly reached for my hand under the table. Her small fingers curled around mine. I squeezed back. Vanessa crossed her arms. You're being cruel, ungrateful. We've included you in everything. Included me, I repeated, by telling me I didn't belong at the Christmas table in my own home. Her mouth pursed. You're twisting it. I'm repeating it, I said, word for word. I took a breath and pulled out the final set of papers. Daniel's letter, the trust summary, the updated will. This, I said, tapping the top page, is what has changed. Brian snatched it up, scanning. His eyes moved faster, then slower, then shot back to mine. What is this, he demanded. My estate plan, I said. My decisions, made while I am clear and calm and fully aware of how my family treats me. Vanessa leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes flew across the page, then widened. You created a trust, she asked, voice rising. For Chloe, Chloe's head jerked. For me, yes, I said gently. For you when you're older. So that no matter what happens between the adults in this room, you will have something that is yours, a place to land if you choose differently from your parents. Vanessa slammed the paper back onto the table. You had no right to do this behind our backs. I blinked slowly. Behind your backs, yes, she hissed. We are your family. We're supposed to make these kinds of decisions together. Like we decided together where I would sit on Christmas Eve, I asked. Her jaw clenched. Brian's voice came out strained. Mom, this changes everything. You're locking the house in a trust, and I only get, he pointed at the numbers, this a portion, I said. Enough to acknowledge that you are my son, not enough to keep financing choices I didn't pee. You're punishing me, he said, hurt and anger twisting his features into something unfamiliar. Because Vanessa and you don't get along. I shook my head. I'm holding you accountable for the way you stood by while your wife humiliated me. There's a difference. He shoved his chair back so hard it squealed. This isn't fair. I flinched at the sound, but my voice stayed calm. Fairness, I said, would have been you telling your wife that your mother deserves a seat at the table she helped pay for. Vanessa pushed her chair back too. You can't do this, she snapped. You're clearly not thinking straight. Ever since your husband died, you've been confused, forgetful, careful. I said quietly. We can challenge this. She went on, warming to her own outrage. If you're not mentally stable, these documents won't hold. Right, Brian. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to tilt. There it was, the next step Daniel had warned me about. When entitlement is challenged, it often calls itself concern. I had a full capacity assessment last week. I said, independent, on the record. I pulled out one last sheet, Daniel's signed statement, brief and clinical. I am competent. I continued, lucid, and tired of being spoken to like a senile child every time I say no. Any court will see that. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came out. You planned this, Brian said slowly, sinking back into his chair. You changed everything without even talking to me. I tried talking. I replied, for years. When you forgot to pay me back and I told you it hurt. When Vanessa mocked my clothes and I told you it stung. When you sat at my table and watched me be sent to the corner like a misbehaving toddler and said, don't start drama, Mom. I held his gaze. You taught me that my feelings didn't matter, so I stopped asking you to consider them. Instead, I considered my future. Chloe's voice piped up, thin and frightened. Dad, Grandma's right. You did let Mom be mean. Chloe, stay out of this, Vanessa snapped. Don't speak to her like that, I said quietly. Vanessa turned on me. You're turning my own child against me now. First you steal our house. Now you poison our daughter. This house was never yours. I cut in, my voice still soft but edged with steel. And I'm not poisoning anyone. I'm telling the truth in front of someone who deserves to grow up knowing what that sounds like. Tears gathered in Chloe's eyes. She squeezed my hand harder. Chloe, I said, turning to her, none of this is your fault. I love you. That will not change, no matter what these papers say. Vanessa stood abruptly. We're leaving, she declared. This is sick. You're sick. We'll talk to a lawyer. We'll fight this. Of course, I said. You're free to do that, with your own money. She blinked. What I will not be paying for an attorney to help you take away my home and rewrite my wishes. I said, if you believe a judge will side with a woman who threw her mother-in-law out of a Christmas dinner over the woman who built the house, you're welcome to test that. Brian put his face in his hands for a moment, massaging his temples. When he looked up, his eyes were damp. I can't believe you'd do this to us, he whispered. Do this to us. The words hit like a dull slap, not because they were true, but because I recognized them. I had said some version of them 1,000 times in my head every time he disappointed me. I am not doing this to you. I said I am doing this for me, for Chloe, for the younger version of myself who thought loving people meant never letting them feel consequences. I gathered the papers back into the folder, one by one. And for your father, I added, he wanted this house to protect his family, not to reward whoever shouted the loudest. Brian's voice cracked. So that's it. You're just cutting me off, I said, standing slowly. My knees protested, but my spine stayed straight. I'm cutting off your access to my bank account, my property, and my patience for being treated like furniture. You're my son. That won't change. But you are no longer my retirement plan, and I am no longer your emergency fund. He stared at me, then laughed bitterly. We were counting on you, he said. I know, I replied. That was the problem. Vanessa grabbed her purse. Come on, Brian, she snapped. We're not staying here and listening to this abuse. I almost laughed at that. Abuse. The quiet woman who had spent years swallowing every insult was abusive because she finally said no more. Chloe stood reluctantly, still holding my hand. I don't want to go, she whispered. Vanessa shot her a look. You don't have a choice. Actually, I said gently, she does. Just not tonight. I knelt, ignoring the protest in my joints, and looked Chloe in the eyes. Listen to me, sweetheart. You are always welcome in this house. When you're older, when you can decide things for yourself, there will be a door and a bed and a plate at the table with your name on it. Do you understand? Her lower lip trembled. She nodded. One hot tear slipped down her cheek and fell onto my hand. I'm sorry they were mean to you, she whispered. My chest ached. I'm sorry they put you in the middle, I replied. That's not your burden to carry. Vanessa exhaled sharply. Enough. Say goodbye. Chloe threw her arms around my neck. I held her tightly, memorizing the feel of her, the faint shaking in her shoulders, the way she clung like someone afraid of losing something important. I love you. I murmured into her hair. "I love you too," she sobbed. Then she was pulled away, bundled back into her coat, ushered toward the door like she was the one who had committed a crime. Brian paused on the threshold, one hand on the knob. He turned back, his face a tangle of anger, grief, and something like realization. "This is going to end badly for you, Mom," he said hoarsely. "You're going to end up alone. No one to take care of you when you really need it." I met his gaze, my heart breaking and hardening at the same time. "I've been alone for a long time. Brian," I said. "The only difference now is that I'm not paying for the privilege." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "And as for being taken care of," I added, softer now, "I'd rather have a small circle of people who truly see me than a house full of relatives waiting for me to die." He shook his head, eyes bright. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said honestly. "Regret is part of being a mother, but I will not regret protecting myself." He didn't have an answer for that. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. No dramatic slam, no shouted final words on either side, just a clean, small sound that felt strangely like the end of a chapter. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door. My legs wobbled. The quiet of the house pressed in, not the suffocating quiet of being ignored, but the raw, ringing quiet that follows a storm. My hands were shaking when I picked up the plates from the table. One still had half a slice of bread on it, untouched. Brian's. I hesitated, then scraped it into the trash, at the far end of the table. Chloe's drawing lay under her plate where she'd left it in the chaos. I picked it up. The house, the tree, the 4 little figures. I traced the faint silver outline of the gray-haired woman standing slightly to the side. I took a pen from the counter and, with slow, careful strokes, drew a small table in front of the house, 4 chairs. Then I crossed out one of them and rewrote the name above another. "Grandma," I whispered, labeling the chair at the head. My knees finally gave up, and I sank into that seat, the one at the head of my own table. It felt too big and too small at the same time. Tears came then. Not the hot, humiliated tears of Christmas Eve, but something deeper, quieter. Grief for the son I'd lost while he was still living. Grief for the version of myself who had believed that if she gave enough, sacrificed enough, swallowed enough pain, she would eventually be allowed to stay. I let myself cry. There in the chair they had once decided I didn't deserve. Then, slowly, the sobs faded, my breathing evened out, and in the settling silence, another feeling rose to the surface, not joy. This was not a joyful thing, but a strange, bittersweet satisfaction. For the first time in my life, I had not begged, I had not explained myself into exhaustion. I had not folded myself smaller to fit someone else's idea of where I belonged. I had simply chosen to tell the truth, chosen to protect what I had built, chosen to believe that my worth did not begin and end with what I could give other people. The house creaked softly as the heater kicked on. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Life, indifferent, went on. I looked at the empty plates, the scattered crumbs, the folder still open on the table with my name on every page, and for the first time since my husband died, I felt something like safety, lonely and fragile, but real, settle in my bones. They had taken my chair at Christmas. Tonight, I had taken back my whole table. The house felt heavier after they left, as if the walls themselves had exhaled a long-held breath. That night, I walked from room to room without turning on the lights, letting the dim glow from street lamps spill across the hardwood floors. Their voices no longer echoed inside these walls. Their footsteps no longer carried down my hallway. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like truth, raw, clean, bare. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, holding the warm mug in both hands. My fingers still trembled, but not from fear, something else. Maybe release, maybe relief. It was too early to name it. I sat at the kitchen table. the same table they had once pulled away from me like I was clutter. I ran a dish towel over its surface, wiping away crumbs from the stew we'd eaten or tried to eat earlier. The chair Brian had thrown back still sat crooked, one leg hooking over the rug. I straightened it slowly, writing it the way you'd write a picture frame after an earthquake, a small gesture of order after chaos. My phone buzzed. A message from Brian. "Mom, we need to talk. You can't mean what you said. Call me." I stared at the screen. Not a single question about how I was feeling. Not a word about Chloe crying in my arms. Not even a shadow of regret. Just the urgency of someone who'd lost access to resources he'd assumed belonged to him for the first time in my life. I didn't reply. Instead, I powered off the phone completely. The click felt final, like turning a key in a lock and choosing not to open the door again. I finished my tea and rinsed out the mug. The warm water washed over my hands, grounding me. Daniel's words replayed in my head. You can't control how they treat you, but you can control how much access they have to your life. Access. Such a simple word with such sharp edges. I didn't go to bed right away. My body was tired, but my mind wasn't ready for darkness. Instead, I sat on the couch and pulled out Chloe's drawing, the one she'd protected earlier like it was something fragile. The silver-haired figure stood slightly apart from the others, a quiet witness to their world. It stung, the way she'd placed me outside the little cluster, but maybe she'd seen something none of us wanted to acknowledge. I traced the faint silver line with my fingertip. "One day, you'll understand," I whispered, "or maybe you already do." The heater hummed in the background. I pulled the quilt over my lap and let my eyes drift closed. Not quite asleep, but not fully awake, in that half space. I imagined Chloe older, stronger, sitting in this very room someday not as a child, but as someone who knew how to choose kindness in a world that often rewarded cruelty. The thought warmed me more than the heater ever could. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds in thin, pale stripes. I made myself oatmeal with brown sugar, sat at my small breakfast nook, and looked out at the frost on the lawn. The morning felt manageable. Not happy, not triumphant, just steady. My phone stayed powered off. If Brian or Vanessa wanted something from me now, they would have to sit with the silence I once sat with alone, around 10. A soft knock sounded at my door. My heart jolted, but when I peeked through the curtain, I saw Joan from next door holding a thermos and a grocery bag. Her familiar knitted hat was pulled down over her ears, her winter coat zipped to her chin. I opened the door. "Oh, honey," she sighed the moment she saw my face. "You look like you lived a whole year in one night." I let out a weak laugh. "It feels like it. I brought soup." She lifted the grocery bag, and some fresh rolls, and a lemon pie because you always pretend you don't like dessert. But I've seen the way you look at lemon pie. I smiled despite myself. "Come in." She placed the items on the counter and gave me a long, searching look. I saw their car pulling out last night. Fast. Chloe looked upset. She cried. I said quietly, "It wasn't her fault." "It never is the kid's fault," Joan murmured. Then she asked gently, "Did it finally happen?" I nodded. "Yes, and no yelling this time, just clarity." She squeezed my hand. "Good, you deserve clarity." We sat at the table together, eating warm rolls with butter melting into every crease. Joan didn't ask for details. She didn't prod or pry. She simply sat with me, offering her presence the way some people offer blankets on a cold night. When she finished her coffee, she reached into her coat pocket. "I want you to have this," she said, pressing a small metal key into my palm. "What is it?" "My spare house key. In case things ever feel too heavy over here. My couch is old, but it doesn't judge anyone." Emotion stung my throat. I closed my hand around the key. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me. Just use it if you need to." After she left, the house felt different, not larger or lighter, but connected, like one quiet string tied my home to hers. I spent the afternoon doing something I hadn't done in years, going through old boxes in the attic. Not to give things away, not to prepare for anyone else's future, but simply because I wanted to remember who I had been before motherhood became a currency. I found my husband's toolbox, his handwriting still etched on the lid. I found Brian's kindergarten drawings, a stack of birthday cards I'd saved, a photograph of us camping by the lake. Brian, only 10, smiling at his father like he'd hung the moon. That little boy had once loved me without reservation. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, dust motes floating in the afternoon light, and let myself cry again, but this time it wasn't grief for losing him. It was grief for all the years I'd held on too tightly, after a while. I wiped my eyes and packed the items neatly. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing which parts of it deserved space in the future. I closed the attic door gently and returned downstairs. The living room was still, the air soft, the quiet comforting in a way I hadn't known quiet could be. My mind drifted to Brian again, not with anger this time, but with a strange, tired compassion. I could love him without losing myself. I could hope for him without subsidizing his choices. I whispered into the emptiness, "You'll learn, Brian, one day." The sunlight dimmed, and shadows stretched across the floor like long fingers. The house hummed around me, familiar and solid. My loneliness didn't feel sharp anymore. It felt like a blanket thin. Yes, but warm enough. For the first time in a long time, I realized something simple and profound. I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. This was my home, mine to lose. And now, finally, mine to keep. The first real sign of fallout didn't come from Brian. It came from the bank. A week after the confrontation, I stopped by my branch to deposit a small check from an old pension plan I'd almost forgotten about. Mr. Caldwell, the manager, greeted me with his usual warm smile. He'd watched me come and go for years, always with some errand that had Brian and Vanessa in the background. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "good to see you. I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Actually, the old me would have tensed, worried, bracing for some disaster I'd need to fix. This new version of me simply adjusted my purse strap and nodded. "All right." We stepped into his glass-walled office. He closed the door gently and motioned for me to sit. "There was some activity on the old joint account," he said, "the one you closed and restructured with Mr. Parker's help." My chest tightened. "What kind of activity?" "Your son came in twice." He said carefully, "Once with his wife. They were upset." I pictured Vanessa leaning over his desk, that sharp tone in her voice. I almost apologized for them, then caught myself. That reflex wasn't mine to obey anymore. "What did they say?" I asked instead. "That you must be confused." He replied that the account closure was a mistake. They wanted me to reverse it. He smiled apologetically. "Of course. We couldn't. Everything was properly authorized. Mr. Parker made sure of that." I exhaled slowly. The room felt smaller for a moment, then steadied around me. "I see," I said. "Thank you for letting me know." "They also asked about your transfers," he added, "the ones you used to send every month. I told them you had chosen to stop." He hesitated, then added, "They seemed surprised." "Of course they did. Entitlement always acts surprised when the free ride stops." "I hope that was all right," he said. "It was honest," I answered. "Honesty is fine." He studied me, then said quietly, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're protecting yourself. I've seen too many parents drain everything for children who don't look up from their phones long enough to say thank you." Something like guilt flickered through me, a leftover reflex. "He's not a bad person," I murmured, "just lost." "People can be both," he said, "but that doesn't mean you have to fund their confusion." I almost laughed at that. It was blunt, but true. When I left the bank, the winter air bit at my cheeks. I pulled my scarf tighter and walked slowly to the bus stop, choosing not to glance toward the strip mall where Brian and Vanessa sometimes shopped. All three of us were moving through the same town now, but from very different positions, a few days later. Joan knocked again, this time with something lighter in her eyes. "You're on the neighborhood chat, right?" she asked. Stepping in with a gust of cold air, I mutely read it. I said, "I don't speak." "Same," she replied, "but I do see things." She perched on the edge of the couch and lowered her voice. "Apparently, Brian's car was repossessed last night." I blinked. What white SUV? Men in reflective vests? Whole drama show. Vanessa screaming in the driveway. "You know how sound travels on this street." Joan shrugged. I stopped peeking through my blinds when it became clear there was nothing I could do but pray. I pictured it Vanessa, wrapped in one of her expensive coats, yelling about respect and payments and mistakes at men who probably heard some version of that speech every single day. They must have missed a few payments, Joan said gently, or only made them because of money that used to flow quietly, invisibly, from my account. I felt a strange mix of sadness and vindication. I don't want them to suffer. I said, "Just grow up. Sometimes growth doesn't happen without suffering," Joan replied. "You know that." I did. My entire life could be summarized as a series of painful growth spurts. That weekend, I saw Brian and Vanessa again, not in my house, but at the grocery store. I was standing in the canned vegetable aisle, comparing prices, when I heard a familiar laugh, Vanessa's. It was thinner than usual, a little too loud. I turned my head before I could stop myself. They were near the dairy section. Brian pushed a cart that wasn't as full as it used to be. Chloe walked beside him, one hand on the cart, the other buried in her pocket. Vanessa had one hand on her hip, the other gesturing sharply at the prices on the shelf. "These used to be cheaper." She complained. "Everything is more expensive now. This is ridiculous." Brian said something I couldn't catch. His shoulders were slumped. His hair looked like it had missed a few barber appointments. Chloe saw me first. Our eyes met, for a moment. The grocery store disappeared. It was just the two of us. A shared island of recognition in a sea of fluorescent lighting. "Grandma," she whispered, lips forming the word more than speaking it. I lifted my hand in a small wave. My heart surged forward, wanting to go to her, but I stayed where I was, not out of pride, out of respect for her position, for boundaries, for the reality that she was the one who would pay the highest emotional price for her parents' choices. She glanced up at Vanessa, then back at me. I could see the war in her eyes, loyalty, love, confusion. Finally. She lifted her fingers in the tiniest answering wave, quick as a blink. Vanessa turned. Following Chloe's gaze, our eyes met. Her expression shuddered immediately. She grabbed Chloe's arm, not hard, but possessive. "Stay with us," she ordered. "We don't need help." I swallowed the instinct to walk over anyway, to force some kind of awkward interaction. Instead, I turned my cart and moved toward the next aisle, my heart pounding. I reminded myself I wasn't their bank anymore. I didn't have to be their emotional cleanup crew either that night. My phone flashed with a string of messages when I finally turned it back on. From Brian, "We saw you at the store. You couldn't even say hi." A second later, "We're going through a lot right now. Mom, the least you could do is be supportive instead of freezing us out." I stared at the words, a familiar guilt nibbling at the edges of my resolve. Then I thought about the Christmas table, the folding chair by the wall, Chloe's tearful eyes, the trust papers with my signature, ink already dry. I typed slowly, my fingers deliberate on the screen. "I'm sorry you're struggling. I hope you find your footing. I am here to listen if you want to talk respectfully. I am not able to offer money." I read the message twice. It was honest. It was clear. It did not apologize for my boundaries. Then I hit send. The reply came quickly. "Wow, cold. After everything we've done for you." I exhaled through my nose and put the phone down. There it was again. The narrative where I was the burden, not the scaffold. Part of me wanted to argue, to send screenshots of bank transfers, to pull out the file of receipts and wave them in his digital face. Instead, I turned off the screen and walked away. The next few weeks settled into a strange new rhythm. I started attending a support group at the community center for seniors with estranged or difficult children. The room smelled like coffee and peppermint, like every church basement and community hall I'd ever sat in over the years. But the faces were different this time. worn, kind, tired in the same ways I was tired. We sat in a circle and told pieces of our stories. A woman whose son only called when he needed bail money. A man whose daughter had cut him off entirely because he sold a house she'd expected to inherit. A grandmother who hadn't seen her grandkids in 3 years because she refused to co-sign a loan. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly. My son let his wife tell me I didn't belong at our Christmas table. I said, "In the house I bought, and for years. I paid their rent and their bills and stayed small to keep the peace." I finally stopped. I hesitated, then added, "They're paying for their own choices now, and I'm sitting with the quiet." There were nods around the circle. No one told me I was overreacting. No one said, "But he's your son," or "That's just how families are." They knew better. One woman reached over and patted my knee. "Quiet is better than disrespect," she said. "You'll get used to the sound of it. One day, you might even like it." I was starting to, in a way, at home. My evenings changed. No more late-night calls asking for just a little help until Friday. No more texts about overdrafts or broken appliances. My phone did ring now and then, Joan inviting me over for cards. Someone from church asking if I could help with a fundraiser. A neighbor wondering if I'd like to join a walking group. For the first time. My social life wasn't organized around emergencies. The emptiness didn't vanish. Loneliness didn't evaporate like mist under sunlight. It sat with me. Sometimes at the kitchen table, sometimes on the couch, sometimes in my bed at night when the house creaked and the wind rattled the windows. But it had changed shape. It no longer had Brian's voice attached to it. It was just solitude, hard, but clean. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I expected to see the same woman I'd always seen: tired eyes, sloped shoulders, the faint curve of someone who'd learned to make herself smaller. Instead, I saw someone standing straight, still lined, still gray-haired, still undeniably old but lighter somehow. Like someone who had put down a heavy box she'd been carrying for miles without realizing it. I almost didn't recognize her. Then I smiled at her. "We're still here." I told the woman in the glass, and that's not nothing. The house, my house, hummed quietly around me. For decades, it had held everyone else's needs. Now, it was finally starting to hold mine. The loneliness remained, but it was no longer an enemy. It was a witness, a reminder that I had lived, loved, lost, and for once chosen not to disappear inside other people's expectations. I was alone. That much was true. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't lost. February arrived quietly, with gray skies and cold mornings that made the windows fog from the inside. I settled into a routine I hadn't planned, but slowly grew into morning walks, afternoon tea, evenings spent reading or sitting in the living room with a blanket over my knees, listening to the hum of a house finally at peace. Every day felt both too long and strangely manageable. One morning, just after dawn, I received a letter. Not from Brian or Vanessa, those would have come as texts. Never as something so personal. It was from Chloe. Her handwriting was round and uneven, the way children write when they're trying not to cry. "Grandma, I miss you. Dad and Mom fight a lot now. Dad sleeps in the guest room sometimes. I don't know what to do. I wish I could come over. I feel safe with you. Love, Chloe." My heart clenched. The words weren't dramatic, they were small, quiet, wounded. The kind of truth children whisper only on paper because speaking it out loud feels too dangerous. I wrote back immediately, "My sweet Chloe, you are not responsible for fixing the grown-ups. You are allowed to feel sad. You are allowed to miss me. And one day, when you are older, you can spend as much time here as you want. I love you, Grandma." I sealed the envelope with hands that trembled, not from sadness, but from remembering that even broken families still have places where love grows in the cracks. I mailed the letter that afternoon. It felt like sending a thread across a ravine, fragile, but still a connection. A few days later, my pastor called. He had noticed I looked lighter, as he put it, though I doubted he understood the cost of that lightness. "Linda," he said, "we're starting a weekly lunch program for seniors cooking, serving, visiting those who live alone. Would you like to volunteer?" I hesitated. For years, I had given everything to people who took and took and took. The idea of giving again felt risky, like offering a freshly healed wound for inspection. But then he added softly, "You don't have to give anything you don't want to. Just show up. Sometimes that's enough." "Okay," I said, surprising myself. "I'll try." The first day, I chopped vegetables next to a woman named Helen who complained about her cataracts and told me stories about her husband who passed 12 years ago, but apparently still haunted the laundry room by hiding socks. I laughed harder than I had in months. Not a polite laugh, a real one. A laugh that felt like breath finally reaching the deepest part of my lungs. "Feels good. Doesn't it?" Helen asked. "It does," I admitted. "It really does." Later that week, as I was kneading dough for the lunch program, Pastor Mark approached with a careful look. "Linda, I need to ask something sensitive," he said. I froze, wiping flour from my fingers. "Go ahead." "Your son and his wife reached out, requesting a meeting. They said you've cut them off financially. They asked if I could mediate." I felt the old guilt stir, like a ghost waking up. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. "That I don't get involved in financial disputes," he said, "and that grown adults should learn to speak to each other with respect." A laugh slipped out of me dry, surprised, grateful. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "Linda, you don't owe anyone money to earn a relationship." "I know," I whispered. "I'm finally learning." In March, Brian sent a long email, not apologizing, not acknowledging anything, just a list of expenses. Chloe needs new braces. Vanessa's hours were cut. The apartment rent increased. We might have to move. "Mom, can you please help us just this once?" Just until we get back on our feet, I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart ached for Chloe. It always would. But I knew if I bent now, everything I fought for would crumble. I typed slowly. "I am sorry for the challenges you're facing. I hope things improve. But I cannot help financially. I will be here to listen if the conversation is respectful. Mom." I hovered over the send button for a moment, feeling the weight of years in my fingertips, then I pressed it. 10 minutes later, his reply came. "You're abandoning us." I closed the laptop. "No," I whispered into the quiet. "I'm saving myself." Weeks passed. Spring began to show in small ways buds on the magnolia tree, birds returning to the feeder, sunlight staying a little longer each day. I took longer walks. I started journaling again. I bought myself fresh flowers, yellow tulips, my husband's favorite, one afternoon. I attended a workshop on later life purpose at the community center. The speaker asked us to write down something we wished we had done earlier in life. I wrote, "Protected my heart." Then I crossed it out and wrote instead, "Protected my boundaries." Then protected my peace. Later. As the room emptied, a woman approached me. She had silver hair in a loose bun and eyes that had clearly cried recently. "I overheard you talking about your son earlier," she said. "How did you get the courage to say no?" I paused, searching for truth. I didn't. I said, "Not at first. I got pushed to the edge, and when I looked down, I realized nobody was holding me, so I stepped back, and then I kept stepping." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Does it get easier?" "Yes," I said, "but not less lonely." Her breath hitched. "I think I can live with lonely." "So can I whispered, and we smiled at each other, two women standing quietly on the far side of survival. One night in early April, I heard footsteps on my porch, soft ones, hesitant. When I opened the door, no one was there, just a folded piece of paper on the welcome mat, a drawing. From Chloe. It was the same house she had drawn before, but this time, the gray-haired woman wasn't standing off to the side. She was standing in the center, and the others were standing beside her, reaching toward her. At the bottom, she had written, "I'll come back when I'm old enough to choose." My chest tightened not with sorrow, but with something gentler, a small, quiet kind of hope. That night, I sat alone at my dining table, the house dim and peaceful around me. I lit a single candle, not for mourning, not for celebration, just for presence. The walls seemed to hum softly, holding decades of memories without suffocating me with them. "I'm still here," I said to the empty room. My voice didn't echo. It settled, warm, steady, enough. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely alone and entirely myself. And there was peace in that, a thin, trembling peace, but real. Spring settled over the neighborhood like a soft exhale. The magnolia tree in my yard bloomed earlier than usual, wide pink petals opening to the sky as if the tree itself had decided it was time for a fresh start. I found myself watching it every morning, coffee in hand, sweater draped over my shoulders, feeling something inside me mirror that slow, stubborn blooming. For the first time in years. My days belonged entirely to me. I wasn't waking up to requests. I wasn't bracing for crises. I wasn't waiting for anyone to need me. My time, my home, my choices, my life had finally returned to my own hands. It was a strange kind of freedom at first. Quiet, almost too quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. In early May, I joined a walking group for seniors. Not the kind of seniors who complained about their hips and blood pressure, though we did that, too, but the kind who wore sneakers with bright laces and talked about wanting to see the world before their knees gave out. Our first walk took us to the lakeside trail. The sun glittered on the water like shards of glass, and geese waddled along the path with the entitlement of royalty. I walked beside Helen, the sock-losing widower's wife, and a man named Walter, who wore a hearing aid he kept forgetting to turn on. Helen nudged me as we walked. "So," she said, "been on any dates lately?" I laughed loud enough to scare a goose. "A date at my age? That's not a no." She waggled her eyebrows. "Don't think we haven't noticed you glowing lately." "I am not glowing." I insisted. Walter cupped his hand to his hearing aid. "What's glowing?" "Who's glowing?" "Is there a fire?" Helen sighed. "Turn your hearing aid on." Walter. He fiddled with it until it whined. "Oh, well, that's better. Who's glowing, Linda?" Helen announced proudly. I groaned. "I'm just at peace." Helen squeezed my arm. "Honey, peace looks good on you." It was silly, but I felt a little taller after that. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside the travel agency downtown. The windows were filled with posters of places I used to dream about as a young woman: Italy, Japan, Switzerland, the Grand Canyon, for decades. Those dreams had been stored in the attic of my heart, the way I stored old quilts and baby clothes in my real attic. I walked inside before I could lose my nerve. A cheerful young woman greeted me. "Hello, looking to travel?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. I'm thinking about Italy." She brightened. "First time, yes. First time for everything. Really." She pulled out a pamphlet with pictures of Tuscany and Venice stone paths, sun-drenched hills, gondolas drifting on quiet water. "It's beautiful," I murmured, tracing one image with my fingertip. "It really is," she said. "You deserve to see it." Normally, I would have brushed off a compliment like that, but instead, I found myself smiling and saying, "Yes, I do." I walked out with a packet of information and a strange, fluttering excitement in my chest. I wasn't booking the trip yet, but for the first time since my husband died, I felt like I might actually go somewhere that wasn't a grocery store or a clinic or someone else's emergency. Meanwhile, my volunteer work at the lunch program grew into something more than chopping vegetables. One morning, as I arranged slices of lemon pie on plates, Pastor Mark approached with a clipboard. "Linda," he said, "would you consider leading one of the support circles?" I blinked. "Me, why?" "Because people listen when you talk," he said simply. "Because you've lived. Because you speak with clarity and kindness without sugarcoating the truth." I stared at him. No one had ever described me like that, But I'm not an expert. I protested. You are, he said. In the ways that matter. His confidence rattled me, but in a good way, like a door I'd thought was locked, suddenly swinging open. So I said yes. The next week, I sat in a circle with 6 women and 2 men, all with stories of strained families, financial burdens, grief, regret. They looked at me with the expectation that I knew something, and to my surprise, I did. There's no right way to save yourself. I told them. There's only the moment you decide your life matters. 2. And then you take one small step, and then another. A woman across from me wiped her eyes. A man nodded slowly, staring at the floor. Afterward, someone hugged me. Someone else held my hand, and one woman whispered, "Thank you. You made me feel less alone." I walked home that day feeling taller again, lighter again, more myself than I had been in decades. That evening, Joan invited me to her house for tea. Her living room was filled with mismatched pillows and books stacked in precarious towers. She poured me chamomile and handed me a saucer painted with violets. "You look different," she said, settling into her chair. "Brighter." "I'm happy," I said cautiously. "Not fully, not all the time, but I'm getting there." Joan nodded. "Healing isn't a straight line, but you're walking it." I took a sip of tea. Brian emailed again. Her face softened. What did he say? That they might move to a smaller place, that money is tight, that things between him and Vanessa are strained. Joan raised an eyebrow. Did he ask for money? I nodded. Not directly, but clearly. "What did you say I told him I could offer emotional support? Not financial." "Good." She leaned forward. "And how did that feel?" I thought about it. "Honest." I said, hard, sad, but honest. She smiled. "That's healing. Linda, not happiness. Honesty." Days passed, then weeks. March turned into April. The magnolia petals began to fall, carpeting the yard in pale pink. One afternoon, I sat in my garden trimming dead branches when I heard laughter next door. Joan chatting with her granddaughter. The sound made something in my chest ache, but not with envy, with recognition. Family didn't have to look like the perfect postcard Brian wanted to create. Family could be chosen, shown up for, held together by intention, not obligation. Later, I brewed a pot of tea and brought Joan a plate of cookies. Her granddaughter waved at me shyly before running back to her coloring book on the floor. "Stay a bit?" Joan asked. So I did. We talked about roses and recipes and her neighbor who kept forgetting trash day. The simple comfort of companionship filled the room like warm light. When I returned home, the house didn't feel empty. It felt open. One morning in late April, I received another letter from Chloe, this time slipped under my door before dawn. "Grandma, I saw the travel papers on your table last time I visited. Are you going somewhere? I hope you go. I hope you do everything you want. Love, Chloe." I pressed the letter to my chest, breathing it in. Later that day, I called the travel agency. The same cheerful woman answered. "Hello. Ready to book that trip?" I hesitated for only 3 seconds this time. "Yes," I said. "Let's do it. To Italy. To Italy." I could almost hear her smiling. "Wonderful. When would you like to go?" I looked out the window at my blooming garden. "June," I said. "I want to see it while the world is still bright." After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I barely recognized it. Excitement, the good kind, the kind that comes from possibility, not fear. In May, the walking group threw me a small celebration when they learned about my upcoming trip. To New Beginnings, Helen cheered, clinking her water bottle against mine. Walter raised his bottle. To what she said, and also to turning my hearing aid on laughter erupted around us. Not polite laughter, real laughter, mine included. I walked home afterward with my cheeks sore from smiling. I never thought joy could return to me like this, quietly, steadily, like a bird finding its way back to a familiar branch. A week later, at the lunch program, Pastor Mark pulled me aside. "Linda," he said, "I've been meaning to ask, would you consider speaking at our summer gathering about boundaries, strength?" Starting over, I blinked. Me, why me? "Because people listen to you," he said. "Because you've rebuilt more than a life. You've rebuilt yourself." I felt warmth bloom in my chest. Not the painful kind, something softer, almost tender. "I'll do it," I said. As he walked away, I stood there feeling proud, genuinely proud. Not because I had won something, not because anyone had chosen me, but because I had chosen myself. By the end of May, my suitcase sat open on my bed, half packed, guidebooks, comfortable shoes, a small journal, a scarf my husband gave me years ago. I ran my fingers over the fabric. "Look at me," I whispered, half smiling, finally going somewhere. The house hummed around me. The air was warm. The future, uncertain but beautiful, felt close enough to touch. I wasn't the same woman who had been banished from her own Christmas table. I wasn't the woman who whispered apologies into silence. I wasn't the mother waiting for approval like oxygen. I was someone new, someone steady, someone whole. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, looking at the open suitcase, and realized my life was not ending with solitude. It was beginning with freedom, and for the first time in a very long time, I couldn't wait to see what came next. There's something no one tells you about getting older. They tell you your body will ache, your friends will pass, the world will move faster than you can keep up. They don't tell you that one of the hardest things you'll ever do is admit that the people you love most can hurt you the deepest, and that sometimes survival means stepping back from your own blood. For years, I believed being a good mother meant always staying, always giving, always saying yes. I thought love meant carrying everyone else's weight. Even when my knees buckled, I thought that if I was kind enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, I would finally earn my seat at the table. But the truth is simple and hard. Some people will take everything you give and still say you don't belong. The night Vanessa told me I wasn't allowed at my own Christmas table, something inside me broke, but something else finally woke up. I realized I had spent my whole life building a home for people who felt entitled to throw me out of it. I realized that the chair they took away from me wasn't the only thing I had to lose or to reclaim. I couldn't make them love me. I couldn't make them respect me, but I could decide how much of my life I handed over in the name of family. If you're listening to this and your heart is sore because you recognize yourself in my story, in the quiet crying, in the swallowing of insults, in the desperate hope that one day they'll treat you better, hear me clearly. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not a bad parent for refusing to fund your own mistreatment. You are allowed to say, "This is enough." You are allowed to keep what you built for people who see your worth. You are allowed to walk away from a table that only feeds you humiliation. They took my seat that Christmas. They thought they were pushing out an old woman past her usefulness. What they didn't understand was this: a chair at the table is just wood and fabric, the name on the will, the name on the deed, the name on a life you refuse to surrender. That is where real power sits. I may grow old alone. I may die with fewer visitors, fewer photos on the mantle, fewer people pretending to care, but I will leave this world knowing one simple, quiet victory. I chose myself before it was too late, and I chose to put my name back where it always belonged, not just on the house, not just on the will, but at the head of my own life. And that, in the end, is a seat no one can take from me. If this story touched something in you, an old wound, a quiet fear, a truth you've tried to swallow, don't keep it inside. Share your thoughts. Tell your story. And ask yourself one question: who truly deserves a seat at your table, and who only stayed because you never said no?